Welcome back, 5th graders. We're on Domain 3 Poetry, Lesson 10, Strange Patterns. So our objectives for today are to identify parallel structure in poetry and analyze its use in compare and contrast scenes, and to create and share an original poem utilizing parallel structure. Our key vocabulary for today is arbor, a structure used for supporting vines which wind around the arbor as they grow. Scuppernongs are large grapes found in the southeastern United States, and a parallel structure is when the same form is repeated in a series of lines or stanzas. It's also poets are often use parallel structure to demonstrate the linking of two ideas. So right now we're going to read a poem that's by a woman named Carrie McCray. She was born in Virginia, but she moved to New Jersey as a child, so she remembers them well, and in this poem she's actually going to compare the two places. She's also African American, and she grew up at a time when many places were segregated, so the different races didn't get to use the same spaces. Before we read her poem, though, let's read her biography. Born on October 4, 1913 in Lynchburg, Virginia, Carrie McCray was the ninth of 10 children. She remembered childhood in Virginia fondly. However, when McCray was 7, her family moved to Montclair, New Jersey, where the family met intimidation and threats from neighbors who were unhappy to have a black family in a white neighborhood. McCray was surrounded by poetry at a young age. James Weldon Johnson and Langston Hughes were family friends and guests in the family's home. As an adult, McCray found that these influences helped shape her writing. She published Adios Means Goodbye in 1966 and continued writing throughout her life, publishing other works such as the memoir Freedom's Child, The Life of a Confederate General's Black Daughter. Surprisingly, it wasn't until age 73 that McCray came to think of herself as a writer. She died in 2008 at age 94. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to read through this, and pause the video at any time if you need to reread it a couple of times. Okay, so we're going to be talking about parallel structure. So it occurs when the same form is repeated in a series of lines and stanzas. So they're basically parallel. So for example, in stanza 1 and stanza 2, both of them started with when I was a young child. So those are exactly the same, so those are precisely parallel. In stanza 1, line 2, and stanza 2, line 2, it talks about how these are similar because it's the city and state where she lived at the time. So these are similar. They're not exactly parallel, but they're pretty close. Stanza 1 and stanza 2 for line 3, it says, I could not ride the I could now ride. So again, these are almost the same, it just changed one of the words in it. So small changes can actually make a big meaning for it. Trolley car and sitting next, again, that's the same. And then to our white neighbor, again, that's also precisely parallel. So how do the trolley systems in these two states differ from each other? Well, in Virginia, the trolley is segregated, but in New Jersey, people of different races actually sit next to each other. So based on the way the trolley passengers are arranged in each state, who would you expect to be more friendly to McCray, the white neighbor in Virginia or the white neighbor in New Jersey? Give a reason for your poem. So the general assumption is that people in segregated communities were more resistant to minorities. Therefore, it's common to expect that the Virginia neighbor would be less friendly than the New Jersey one. McCray mentions being nestled close to her white neighbor in Virginia. Based on the words she uses, how does she seem to feel around this neighbor? So when you say nestled close, it tends to make she feel safe and comfortable. She also mentions the bitter line that separates her house from the house of her white neighbor in New Jersey. So based on these words, how does she feel about this? Well, a bitter taste isn't a very good taste, which means she probably doesn't feel very comfortable and she feels just isolated and separated from them. So I could assume this is probably not a comfortable situation. So now you're going to compose your own poem to show a contrast between two situations that are similar but not exactly the same. So for example, you might go to school one day and have a regular teacher, and then maybe the next day you had a substitute teacher. You might be spending a night at a friend's house versus at home. Eating at home versus going to a restaurant. Staying at home with your parents or staying with a babysitter. Having a pet dog versus a pet fish. So they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. That's what we're looking for. Feel free to use any of these examples for your poem. If you would like to be creative and think of your own, feel free to do that as well. So in this exercise, you're going to plan the next poem you're going to write. So this poem will be just like Carrie Allen McCray's, because it's going to compare and contrast two situations that are similar but not exactly alike. So you're going to answer your questions below to start thinking and planning out your poem. So for one, your poem is going to describe two situations that are similar but not exactly alike. You can pick what you want to write. List the two situations you're going to compare and contrast. Then remember that comparing is how they're alike. So you're going to write down at least three ways that they are alike. What are they similar with? That these comparisons are going to help you with the parallel structure of the poem. But remember, the other end of that is contrasting, so we're going to have things that are different. For this one, we want at least 3 ways that they are completely different. You're going to use these to contrast as we go out throughout the poem. So remember that McCray does not exactly state or say what she likes best. Instead, she uses words as nestled close or bitter line to show how she felt about that situation. She doesn't say, I was unhappy. She uses different kinds of language to express how she was feeling. So you're going to list at least 2 phrases that can help the reader understand which thing in the poem you like best. So for example, if you were talking about, going to a restaurant versus staying at home for dinner, you might not say, well, I liked going to the restaurant best. You might say, the atmosphere was comforting to know that I can, get what I wanted. So it changes it a little bit so it's not directly stating how you're feeling. So your job would be to write some ideas. So you're going to come up with 2 things that are similar but not exactly alike. You're going to come up with 3 comparing things about them, and 3 contrasting items, and also come up with 2 phrases that help your reader understand which one of those you like best. And then you're going to compose your poem. So remember, you're going to describe those both situations and list the ways that they're alike and similar, and think about how to use that parallel structure. If you get confused about the parallel structure, feel free to watch back in the rest of the video to help you understand it a little bit better. And we will see everyone in our next lesson.